Good evening and welcome to Washington. I'm James Rosen sitting in for Brett Baer, and this is a Fox News alert. Breaking tonight, President Trump's pick to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court apparently has a problem with some recent comments the president has made, criticizing federal judges presiding over cases involving his immigration policy. This as Americans across the country and citizens around the world wait with mounting tension for the appellate court decision that is expected as soon as tomorrow on President Trump's executive order on immigration. The ruling will determine whether this order will remain suspended or go back into effect. Either way, most observers predict this court battle is far from over, with the case likely destined for the U.S. Supreme Court. We have Fox team coverage. Dan Springer is in Seattle looking at the trail of controversial opinions that has made the Ninth Circuit Court one of the most far left and frequently reversed in the annals of American law. But first, to Chief White House correspondent John Roberts, live on the North Lawn. John, good evening.
James, good evening to you. And a split tonight between the president and his Supreme Court nominee over the sharp language that the president has used in attacking the ruling against his immigration ban. Judge Neil Gorsuch telling Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal tonight that he found the verbal attacks that the president has been leveling at members of the judiciary disheartening and demoralizing. A White House official tonight said that Judge Gorsuch was merely stating his views, and there is no sign at this point that the president is about to back off.
It's INA 212F 8 USC 1182F. Suspension of entry or imposition of restrictions by the president.
While the Ninth Circuit ponders the fate of his immigration ban, President Trump gave a public lesson in the law today. Reading the statute, he says, gives him the authority to do it.
A bad high school student would understand this. Anybody would understand this.
The president is on the warpath against the courts, tweeting that federal district judge James Robart's order to suspend the immigration ban was horrible, dangerous, and wrong, warning if the U.S. does not win this case, as it so obviously should, we can never have the security and safety to which we are entitled. Politics. And he was not impressed with what he heard from the Ninth Circuit last night.
I listened to a bunch of stuff last night on television that was disgraceful. It was disgraceful. Because what I just read to you is what we have. And it just can't be written any plainer or better.
In oral arguments, the court zeroed in on the president's intent and what he repeatedly said on the campaign trail. Is the executive order a Muslim ban in sheep's clothing, written to include everyone, but really targeting Muslims?
This is Judge Clifton. Do you deny that, in fact, the statements attributed to then-candidate Trump and to his political advisors, and most recently Mr. Giuliani, do you deny that those statements were made?
Judge Clifton, I know. I would note that Judge Robart himself said that he wasn't going to look at campaign statements.
A highly, highly respected judge in Boston ruled very strongly in our favor.
The president pointed repeatedly to a federal judge in Boston who suspended the executive order in its opening hours but reinstated it after determining it did not single out Muslims. The press secretary today said the order is on solid ground legally.
We've got to go back and remember that the DOJ's Office of Legal Compliance vetted this order, deemed it was legal. So we've followed the entire process to make sure that this was done correctly, constitutionally, legally, and every otherwise.
But the president seemed to be bracing for a negative decision from a notoriously liberal appellate court.
And I don't ever want to call a court biased, so I won't call it biased. And we haven't had a decision yet. But courts seem to be so political. And it would be so great for our justice system if they would be able to read a statement and do what's right.
If the president does get a favorable ruling from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, he will restart his immigration ban immediately. If he doesn't, he'll have to fight out the constitutionality of the order in district court in Seattle, a process that could take months. And James, one other piece of business from the White House tonight. Fox News has learned that an executive order is circulating at the White House for comment that would make good on another of the president's campaign promises to keep the detention center at Guantanamo Bay open indefinitely. James?
No shortage of news at the White House. John Roberts, thank you. The federal appeals court based in San Francisco that is expected to rule on the president's executive order probably tomorrow has long been known as the most liberal appellate bench in America. Correspondent Dan Springer reports tonight on some of the decisions that have earned the Ninth Circuit that reputation.
The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, based in San Francisco, has been a target of Republicans for decades. It routinely is the most overturned court in the U.S. In 2012, the Supreme Court reversed 86% of the rulings it reviewed from the Ninth. Perhaps the most controversial decision, striking down the Pledge of Allegiance due to the phrase, "under God." It also ruled citizens have no constitutional right to own guns, and is often overruled when showing its disdain for capital punishment. Critics deride the court, calling it the Ninth Circus and the Nutty Ninth. Arizona Senator Jeff Flake is the latest Republican to introduce legislation to break up the Ninth, which covers 9 western states with 20% of the country's population.
We have a bedrock principle of swift access to justice, and if you live in Arizona or anywhere in the Ninth Circuit, you just don't have it. 15 months it takes for the average decision to be handed down, and that's far too long.
Flake's bill would create a new 12th Circuit Court, taking 6 states from the 9th. Some think the court's liberal label is overblown.
The thing about the law is there's ambiguity. There are fair and reasonable and smart minds can differ on important legal questions.
Now, the Ninth Circuit is about to make a key decision on President Trump's travel ban from 7 countries with majority Muslim populations. Only one of the judges randomly assigned to the case, Richard Clifton, was appointed by a Republican. William Canby was appointed by Jimmy Carter, and Michelle Friedland by Barack Obama. During yesterday's oral argument, Judge Friedland was especially hard on the Justice Department's lawyer.
Has the government pointed to any evidence connecting these countries with terrorism?
Making a prediction from oral arguments is tough, but a former U.S. attorney under President Bush thinks Trump will likely suffer another setback.
Listening to them, I think there may be an inclination to leave Judge Robart's order intact and let Judge Robart's process continue.
Leaving Judge Robart's decision in force would also, of course, leave the restraining order in place. Still, there are others who think, despite this being the Ninth Circuit, the panel could come up with a narrow ruling that would reinstate the travel ban for those who are not green card holders and have never set foot in the U.S. James?
Dan Springer, thank you. This is another Fox News alert. A U.S. official tells Fox News Iran has launched another missile from the launch pad where it conducted a ballistic missile test late last month. This is also the pad where Fox first reported exclusive satellite photos indicated another rocket was poised to put a satellite into space. Later, Iran took that rocket off the launcher. The reason Iran scrubbed that launch is not known. The missile that was fired just 11 hours ago is not a ballistic missile, but a short-range surface-to-air missile. We are told it impacted 35 miles away. All this amid a simmering war of words between President Trump and Iran's supreme leader. Correspondent Rich Edson reports from the State Department.
President Trump prevented Iranians and those from 6 other countries from traveling to the United States. Iran then tested a ballistic missile. In response to that, U.S. sanctions.
With all pressures and sanctions imposed on us, they hope to paralyze us. But of course, they haven't fulfilled their hopes and will never do so, and no enemy can paralyze Iran.
And then a presidential response.
They are the #1 terrorist state.
And more from his administration.
As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
I think Iran is kidding itself if they don't realize that there is a new president in town.
Then continued disdain by Twitter. President Donald Trump tweeted, quote, "Iran is playing with fire. They don't appreciate how kind President Obama was to them. Not me." Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, tweeted, quote, "Trump says be scared of me. No, Iranians will respond to such words with February 10th rallies and will show what is their position towards threats, the anniversary of its 1979 Islamic Revolution."
The Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has always banked on animosity towards the United States. That is basically what legitimizes him at home in front of his own small base in Tehran. He'll continue doing that. The question is, how can President Trump distinguish between the bad policies of the Iranian regime?
And there are also reports the White House is considering labeling Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist organization, a designation that would subject it to increased sanctions. The Trump administration is also considering Elliott Abrams, a former Middle East advisor to President George W. Bush, as the top deputy to Secretary Rex Tillerson at the State Department. While some Republicans claim Elliott's foreign policy views appear opposed to the president's, they are aligned on the Iran nuclear deal. Abrams wrote this summer in the Jerusalem Jerusalem Post, quote, "We have strengthened the regime with money and a propaganda victory, and we see Iran's support for aggression and terror rising. In time, this agreement will be more and more widely understood as the disaster it was called by its opponents. Let us hope that we all wake up in sufficient time."
Ahead of its state-sponsored demonstrations Friday, Iran's supreme leader says he is thankful to the newcomer, in reference to President Trump, for showing the real face of the United States. One the Ayatollah says is corruption. James.
Rich Edson at the State Department tonight. Rich, thank you. There is also a movement afoot to get the Muslim Brotherhood designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Such a move would carry with it some major implications for America's relationships in the Middle East. Here is senior correspondent Eric Shawn.
The Muslim Brotherhood is banned in 5 Muslim countries, classified as a terrorist group. Founded in Egypt in 1928, its goal is for society to be ruled by Islamic law. Fox News has learned the Trump administration is considering banning it here too, and designating it as a foreign terrorist organization known as an FTO. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer was asked if President Trump will make the designation.
I'm not going to get ahead of any announcements that we may or may not have coming in the near future, but make no mistake, the president understands the threat that our nation faces, and he's going to do everything he can to attack it, root it out, and destroy it.
I firmly believe that it does threaten national security interests.
Florida Republican Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart and Texas Senator Ted Cruz have parallel bills calling on Secretary of State Rex Tillerson to consider if the Muslim Brotherhood should be added to the terrorist list. At his confirmation hearing, Tillerson called the Muslim Brotherhood, quote, agents of radical Islam. Experts say it has U.S. followers, and its ideology has spawned terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and Hamas. But the group claims it renounced violence decades ago.
You have leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood who are designated terrorists. You have organizations under the Muslim Brotherhood like Hamas who are designated as terrorist organizations. So I think it's pretty much a no-brainer that this is a terrorist organization.
But some are wary of labeling the group as terrorists. Robert Polito specializes in constitutional law at Seton Hall University and says the group does not qualify as a terrorist organization under U.S. law.
I think designating the Muslim Brotherhood as an FTO is bad in legal terms. I think it's bad in terms of diplomacy. I think it's bad in terms of civil liberties, and it's bad in terms of our constitutional tradition. And it could have a devastating effect on Muslim American communities in the United States.
Designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group has been tried before. Last year, Congress considered a similar bill that was co-sponsored by now CIA Director Mike Pompeo, but it was not voted on by the House. James.
Eric, thank you. The International Committee of the Red Cross has suspended its aid activities in Afghanistan. The move follows the murder on Wednesday of 6 Red Cross workers and the disappearance of 2 others in northern Afghanistan. The group said an 8-person team was delivering livestock materials when its convoy came under attack. The Taliban has denied responsibility. A local Afghan police chief said the Afghan branch of ISIS may be to blame. U.S.-backed forces are reporting progress against ISIS, but in Syria, a lot of new weapons are headed to the battlefield. Pentagon producer Lucas Tomlinson tells us where they're coming from and what impact they will have on the 21st century's bloodiest conflict.
In a dramatic escalation, Fox News has learned Russia sent the largest shipment of missiles to date to Syria, a month after Russian President Vladimir Putin pledged to scale back his forces there. The White House didn't deny the report.
We don't have any comment on this time.
This comes as Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, in a rare interview, signaled he is hoping for improved relations with the U.S. under President Trump.
We have to wait. It's still early to expect anything practical. It could be about the cooperation between the U.S. and Russia that we think is going to be positive for the rest of the world, including Syria.
U.S. officials tell Fox in the past 2 days, Russia delivered 50 short-range ballistic missiles to the Syrian port of Tartus along the Mediterranean. Russian SS-21 missiles are called Scarabs by NATO, meant to destroy ground targets up to 100 miles away. Russia also recently fired 6 ballistic missiles from its airbase in Syria against opposition fighters. It is not immediately clear if those opposition fighters were backed by the United States. Russia also completed delivery of its S-300 missile components to Iran, according to Russia's envoy to the Islamic Republic. U.S. officials say Russia still maintains nearly 50 jets, helicopter gunships, and drones in Syria. Meanwhile, the ISIS headquarters in the war-torn country could be surrounded very soon.
Raqqa is a city that the enemy uses for external operations, so what we would expect is that within the next few weeks the city will be nearly completely isolated, and then there will be a decision point to move in.
This comes as the top U.S. commander in Iraq tells the Associated Press he expects the ISIS strongholds of Raqqa and Mosul to fall in 6 months. Previously, the Pentagon had not offered a timeline. James?
Lucas Tomlinson at the Department of Defense for us tonight. Lucas, thank you. A longtime government contractor with a top-secret clearance now stands accused of willfully retaining national defense information. 52-year-old Harold Thomas Martin was indicted today after his detention in August. Martin worked for at least 7 different private companies and allegedly stole documents over a 20-year period. Officials say it may be the largest heist of classified government information in history. No word yet on any plea being entered. An American Navy ship has intercepted and destroyed a ballistic missile in flight using a new type of weapon. The Navy says the guided missile destroyer USS John Paul Jones was off the coast of Hawaii when it successfully tested a new type of surface-to-air missile. Pentagon officials see the development enhancing U.S. security amid growing concerns over North Korea's ballistic missile program. Capitol Hill is still buzzing tonight over the silencing of a high-profile lawmaker in an extraordinary scene that played out on the Senate floor last night. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel joins us now with the video and the backstory of Elizabeth Warren provoking a rare rebuke by her colleagues. Good evening, Mike.
James, good evening. In the next hour or so, Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions is expected to be confirmed the next Attorney General, but tempers flared last night when Massachusetts liberal Elizabeth Warren read an old letter from the widow of a civil rights icon.
Mr. President, I am surprised that the words of Coretta Scott King are not suitable for debate in the United States Senate. I ask leave of the Senate to continue my remarks.
Is there objection?
Object. I appeal the ruling.
Objection is heard.
With that, Senator Warren was told to take her seat and that she would not be allowed to speak further as the Senate considers Jeff Sessions' nomination for Attorney General. Senator Steve Daines said he wasn't looking for a fight.
As the presiding officer, you listen to what's being said on the floor of the United States Senate, and we need to hold both sides to a higher standard.
The Senate has been holding speech marathons about Trump cabinet nominees, and this is the latest sign of irritation.
The Democrats are angry, and they're out of their minds. We're seeing in the Senate Democrats objecting to every single thing.
And some of the GOP anger is likely based on the treatment of a colleague who has been a senator for 20 years.
Nobody here is questioning Jeff Sessions' love of country. Nobody here is questioning his kindness and his collegiality.
Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer accused the GOP of selective enforcement of this rule and being anti-free speech.
The only speech being stifled is speech that Republicans don't agree with. Even speech that is substantive, relevant, on point to the matter this body is considering, and appropriate and measured in tone.
And Warren complained today she wasn't treated fairly.
This is about Coretta Scott King's letter, and that's all this is about. And Mitch McConnell didn't want me to read that letter.
Utah Republican Orrin Hatch has been a senator for 40 years and called the current climate historically bad.
In most of my Senate service, we've never had quite the exhibition that we had last night.
This afternoon, former Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton parroted McConnell and tweeted support for Warren. Quote, "She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted. So must we all." Democratic sources say their base is still furious about the 2016 election and is pushing Senate Democrats to fight on everything. James?
Mike Emanuel at the Capitol tonight. Mike, thank you. One of President Trump's most frequent and powerful promises throughout the 2016 campaign was to improve the lives of our veterans, and especially the medical care they receive through the VA system. Ground zero in that battle, the subject of many unflattering headlines a few years back, is the VA health system in Phoenix. Here is correspondent Will Carr.
3 years after dozens of veterans' deaths were blamed in part on a lack of care at the Phoenix VA, the facility still ranks as one of the worst in the country, and the person hired to turn things around struggles to say where things stand.
In your mind right now, on a scale of 1 to 10, overall, what do you think the status of this facility is compared to 2014?
I wasn't here in 2014, and so I don't have all the details. I know what happened with the access issue in 2014, but I'm going to stay away from a rating because I don't have all the information.
Well, let me ask it this way. What do you think the rating is of the facility right now compared to where you want it to get to be?
Where I want it, well, all of us would want it to be a 10 if the scale is from 1 to 10, but we're not there.
Where are you realistically right now?
I won't give that number only because we have a lot of work to do still.
Former Marine Brandon Coleman is one of the original Phoenix whistleblowers.
We've had 7 directors in 2.5 years, each with more baggage than the last.
The newest director, Rima Nelson, ran the St. Louis VA from 2009 to 2013. During that time, the hospital experienced a number of problems, including having to notify more than 1,800 veterans that they may have been exposed to hepatitis and HIV after equipment was not properly sterilized. Nelson says she took action. The VA then sent her to work in the Philippines for 3 years. Before becoming President Trump's VA Secretary nominee, then Undersecretary for Health David Shulkin introduced Nelson last October and was pressed about her past.
So when we looked at these issues, we actually saw a leader who was decisive, acting with veterans' interests.
Fast forward to December when the VA released ratings for every hospital, and Phoenix once again got the worst possible rating.
That's why we got to stay on it, and that's why we have to have congressional oversight, and that's why it's a national shame that we haven't done a better job.
Ricky Barnes, an Air Force veteran, says his appointments continued to be delayed or canceled.
I've always heard, from top management, we're getting better, but no, the VA system is not getting better.
In January, federal investigators concluded the Phoenix VA continues to struggle with significant patient wait times. The whistleblower from that report is Cuauhtemoc Rodriguez, who continues to work as the chief of specialty care at the hospital.
How do you describe the current state of the Phoenix VA right now?
I say personally that it's gotten worse than when it first got disclosed in 2014 that they were manipulating data, because the people that were manipulating data then are still in charge today.
Phoenix Director Nelson claims they're moving forward by trying to get veterans care quickly, while David Shulkin says he wants to cut red tape and increase trust in the VA. James.
Will Carr, thank you. Stocks were mixed. The Dow lost 36. The S&P 500 gained 2. NASDAQ was up 8. It was never that likely we would see President Trump browsing the men's section at Nordstrom, but now the chief executive is training his Twitter fury on the retail clothing chain because the store announced it is dropping Ivanka Trump's line of clothing and accessories. My daughter Ivanka has been treated so unfairly by Nordstrom, the president tweeted around 11 this morning. She is a great person, always pushing me to do the right thing. Terrible. The president's spokesman saw the move as politically motivated.
There's clearly efforts that to undermine that name based on her father's positions on particular policies that he's taken. This is a direct attack on his policies and her name and so that there's clearly an attempt for him to stand up for her because she is being maligned because they have a problem with his policies.
Nordstrom attributed the move to good business sense, citing declining sales of Ivanka Trump's products. Neiman Marcus, the home shopping network, and other major retailers have made similar announcements recently. That many federal government workers have been and remain opposed to Donald Trump and his policies will come as no surprise. Tonight, chief political correspondent Carl Cameron reports on how some of these entrenched bureaucrats are making use of sophisticated new technologies to mount their resistance to the new president from within.
Opposed to President Trump's agenda, some federal workers at the Environmental Protection Agency have begun using encrypted apps on their personal cell phones so they do not get caught plotting their resistance to the Trump agenda on any government communications devices, which are often monitored.
The tension right now between the incoming administration and the civil service is real, and it's growing.
At the State Department, an institutionally protected, quote, dissent channel for employees to air grievances is said to be flooded as never before. Since President Trump's executive order on immigration, nearly 1,000 State Department employees have added their signatures. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson knows Foggy Bottom is rattled.
We cannot let our personal convictions overwhelm our ability to work as one team.
That may entail making some changes to how things are traditionally done in this department.
When former acting Attorney General Sally Yates ordered Justice Department lawyers not to defend the president's immigration order last week, she was promptly fired. The president's spokesman's been blunt about dissenters.
If they have a big problem with the policies that he's instituting to keep the country safe, then that's up to them to question whether or not they want to stay or not.
The anonymous Twitter account Rogue POTUS Staff, which claims it's, quote, the unofficial resistance team inside the White House, tweeted, quote, Spicer unhappy that he's been set up for failure. POTUS furious that one of his men, portrayed by woman, says it looks weak. Government watchdog groups say they're swamped by potential whistleblowers.
We're hearing this like daily. We're flooded with calls from people who are really concerned about whether they're going to be forced to essentially violate the law.
Federal employees in the Departments of Labor, Agriculture, National Parks, and more are creating new private email accounts outside government systems to communicate with members of Congress, the media, and the public about the Trump agenda. The White House calls it leaking. They call it transparency. James?
Carl Cameron in our D.C. newsroom tonight. Opponents of the Dakota Access Pipeline are calling for protests around the world following the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' decision to allow the final chunk of construction on that project. As correspondent Alicia Acuna reports tonight, officials on site are bracing for the worst.
Blowback from opponents to the Dakota Access Pipeline after the Army Corps of Engineers green-lighted construction on the line's final 1,100 feet. Protests popping up around the country as organizers sent out the call on social media. Senator John Hoeven of North Dakota, whose state is the epicenter for the opposition, has requested more federal law enforcement to help with any resistance.
We need to bring this to a conclusion, not only because we need the energy infrastructure, but also because it's been difficult for the people that live and work in the region.
In December, the Obama administration had allowed for a delay in construction of the last part of the 1,200-mile line. It ordered the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct a new, broader environmental impact statement amid claims by the Standing Rock Sioux that the portion set to run underneath the Missouri River could contaminate their drinking water. But in an executive order, President Trump cleared the way for construction to begin. In a statement, the tribe's attorney said, quote, if DOPL is successful in constructing and operating the pipeline, the tribe will seek to shut the pipeline operations down. For its part, the tribe said it would challenge the president's decision on the grounds that the new environmental review was cut short.
There may be some last-minute efforts in court to stop it, but we expect, based on the judge's rulings previously, that it will be able to go forward.
In addition to lawsuits and protests, opponents are calling for people to contact banks funding the project. The Seattle City Council voted to sever all ties with one of those banks, Wells Fargo.
It's amazing to see people coming together with Native people and realizing that the fight that we're in it's a global fight.
In a statement, the bank said in part, Wells Fargo is one of 17 financial institutions involved in financing the Dakota Access Pipeline. The loans we have provided represent less than 5% of the total. A spokesperson for the Standing Rock Sioux tells Fox News they expect to be back in court as early as Monday. James?
Alicia Acuna, thank you. We will have to wait a little longer for that appellate court decision on President Trump's immigration executive order. Is the case headed to the Supreme Court? And what might happen there? Our all-star panel breaks it down when we come back.
This was done, very importantly, for security. And it couldn't have been written any more precisely. It's not like, oh, gee, we wish it were written better. It was written beautifully. I watched last night in amazement, and I heard things that I couldn't believe. Things that really had nothing to do with what I just read. And I don't ever want to call a court biased, so I won't call it biased. And we haven't had a decision yet. But courts seem to be so political.
That was President Trump speaking to a group of county sheriffs and municipal police chiefs at the JW Marriott Hotel in downtown Washington about his controversial executive order suspending the refugee program and halting immigration from 7 countries of high concern for terrorism. Will that executive order be restored by the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco? Will politics interfere with sound jurisprudence? And was the order beautifully crafted, as the president said? Let's bring in our panel. Daniel Halper of the New York Post, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Charles Hurd, opinion editor for the Washington Times, all three unquestionably beautiful people. A.B., the president seems to think that there is a biased court out there in San Francisco. He said he's not going to call it biased. What say you?
Oh, that's one of his great rally devices where he says, I'm not going to say Hillary Clinton belongs in solitary confinement. But anyway, this is, on the heels of the weekend when the president tweeted about a judge questioning his qualifications, calling him so-called. The Ninth Circuit may be liberal. I'm not an expert about where this is going. I understand that the president has broad authority on this issue, and I don't know how it'll be interpreted by the court. But trying to undermine the court in advance of the decision and delegitimizing the opinion of the court in advance, which is what he did when he didn't know he'd win Pennsylvania, so he tried to convince us that the worst voter fraud happened around the suburbs of Philadelphia. But anyway, we're going to basically hear, if he gets a ruling that he doesn't like, that this is a political, disgraceful court. And it's inappropriate, it's irresponsible, and it's wrong.
So our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts, tracking so many different things for us, confirmed through his reporting that Judge Neil Gorsuch, the president's selection to fill the Supreme Court vacancy created by the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, said in private comments with a Democratic senator today that he finds these comments by President Trump disparaging these judges disheartening and demoralizing. Here is that Democratic senator telling us about that private conversation.
My strong hope is that he will be more vehement publicly. He certainly expressed to me that he is disheartened by the demoralizing and abhorrent comments made by President Trump about the judiciary.
Daniel Halper, how do you think President Trump, watching this broadcast perhaps this very evening, will respond to seeing his selection for a Supreme Court nomination disparaging him?
Well, this is the big threat for Gorsuch right now, because as it is, obviously, one Democratic senator seemed to be slightly convinced about Gorsuch's independence, which is key, obviously, for a judicial figure. The question is will he annoy the person who appointed him so much that he feels like he has to lash out? If Trump can control himself and not lash out and just sort of let Gorsuch float up there on the Hill and do his thing, there's a good chance he'd be confirmed, and there's a good chance that these comments will help show senators on Capitol Hill that he has the independence. If it becomes too political and he starts weighing in, I think it would begin to, it might, you could see where it could go. I don't want to predict too much, that you could see where
we've all seen The Apprentice. We all know where it could potentially go.
You could see where it could threaten his judicial appointment.
Charlie Hurt.
No, I think that if this, as Daniel says, reveals Gorsuch's independence, I think that only helps him, and I think that probably Donald Trump is pleased with that. And of course, Neil Gorsuch has to say that. It's perfectly reasonable that he would take exception to this. But come on, the fights between presidents and the judicial branch go back a long, long ways. We've seen far bigger fights between, Teddy Roosevelt launched a whole jihad against the judiciary in 1912. FDR stacked the courts because he didn't like the courts. They kept telling him that his New Deal plans were unconstitutional, so he just sort of, he didn't get rid of them, but he diluted them so that he could get his stuff through. And I think this is just another example of this, where you have the president clearly doing something that is within the confines of his jurisdiction, and you have the court, you have these judges who are meddling with it, and it's so much so that they're actually getting under the hood and tinkering with the actual legislative or the specifics of how the ban works and why it works and things like that, which is completely outside of their purview. Whether the Ninth Circuit overturns it or not remains to be seen. But a Supreme Court will uphold the president's right to do this.
Just to close the loop on Judge Gorsuch and his comments, we heard from Senator Blumenthal just now in that clip we played that he hopes that Judge Gorsuch displays those comments in a more public way.
I think it's a win-win for him.
Well, so the judge will face a confirmation hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
He'll get asked that a lot.
Yeah, this will come up. Yeah. What do you think he'll say?
I think he'll double down on it. I think it would be foolish not to. And I think that the president, when he stops and thinks about it, because he is going to win this fight, I mean, it will be astonishing if he doesn't win this fight. And so why not win both? Win the fight and get his nominee on the court.
Senate Democrats have been suggesting that this executive order that the president issued, I guess on the last day of January, thereabouts, is actually going to make America less safe, not more safe, in part because of the damage they say it's going to do to our international relationships. Here's one such argument along those lines, again, from a Democratic senator.
I'm gravely concerned about what it's doing to weaken or destabilize our partnerships with Muslim and Arab allies in the region. The assault on Mosul is ongoing right now. The assault on Raqqa is beginning. And in our fight against ISIS, I don't think we can afford to strain our partnership with Iraq.
Now, AB, the administration has sought to make it very clear that this is not an anti-Muslim ban. This only really bans refugees from countries with, or immigrants with countries that have a high concern for terrorism. Do you agree? Do you believe that this is an anti-Muslim ban?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the policy. I can comment on the politics of it. Will Hurd, congressman from Texas, was also airing these same concerns on another broadcast last night.
So let me rephrase my question.
Our need for alliances. It's either legal or it's not.
Is this widely misunderstood to be an anti-Muslim ban from where you sit?
It was a little bit difficult for this administration if you combine the botched rollout with Rudy Giuliani saying they came to me and wanted a Muslim ban and asked me how to work one out for them. It's hard to get around the firestorm it created. It wasn't drawn up and implemented effectively. Maybe if it had been, they wouldn't be facing these complaints.
Daniel, are you hearing grumbling here in the Capitol from conservatives, Republicans, Trump administration supporters, maybe even Trump administration officials, to the effect that the individual who was doing the arguing on behalf of the Department of Justice in San Francisco at the Ninth Circuit yesterday, August Flengy, wasn't as effective as he could have been?
Sean Spicer was asked about it today at the briefing, and he kind of hedged a little. He said the president thought that he made some good points. Didn't quite say he did a great job. But what's striking about the White House's position on this is they're clearly guarding themselves for a loss. They think, or they are preparing at least, to lose this first decision. And I think the risk then becomes, does it consume the first 100 days of the presidency? Well, we've already been talking about it so much. If it prevents the Trump administration from doing other things, then that may be a risk that they can't avoid.
Next up, with a vote coming soon on the president's pick for Attorney General, the panel assesses the state of the battle in the cabinet confirmation wars. Stay with us.
I ask leave of the Senate to continue my remarks.
Is there objection?
Object. I appeal the ruling.
Objection is heard. The senator will take her seat.
She was warned. She was given an explanation. Nevertheless, she persisted.
There is a shocking double standard here when it comes to speech.
I will oppose Jeff Sessions, and I think Senator Warren is owed an apology.
Probably be a while before that apology comes. That was some of the action that occurred on and off the Senate floor as a result of last night's rare evening session, wherein Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, a darling of the progressive left, reread words of condemnation against Attorney General nominee Jeff Sessions that were spoken 30 years ago by the late Coretta Scott King. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell responded by interrupting Senator Warren and staging a vote along strict party lines, formally rebuking her for violating Senate rules of debate. The action then moved to cyberspace, where the hashtag #LetLizSpeak swiftly started trending on Twitter. No one will be silencing our panel tonight. Daniel, is this a significant event? It's certainly a rare one.
Well, the irony, of course, is that if McConnell had just not done anything, nobody would have paid attention to what Elizabeth Warren was saying on the Senate floor, and it would have gone completely unnoticed. So some are left to believe, was it intentional in order to elevate Liz Warren as the face of the Democratic Party? I'm not so sure about that, but what we're seeing is the Democrats are trying to oppose everything. They have zero power in Congress and in Washington, because it's Republican controlled, of course, and they're trying to make something out of nothing, and they're not doing a terrible job of that, and they are slowing things down pretty dramatically on the Hill, and it's creating some problems for President Trump, and it's annoying him.
Well, there is a quantitative way to measure exactly how effective this obstruction is. Here is a chart showing how many cabinet secretaries President Trump has nominated who still are awaiting confirmation. There's 10 of them, as you can see. Jeff Sessions, the nominee for Attorney General, is probably the next up there. By this point in their respective presidencies, Barack Obama had only 3 individuals still awaiting confirmation. George W. Bush, none at all. So, AB, do you regard what the Democrats are doing as the most effective, best politics they can possibly play, given their diminished hand?
No, I think that it is true that Donald Trump's cabinet has been slowed down longer than any since so long that we shouldn't even, it's not worth remembering. And in the end, he's going to get who he wants. And so unless there's this big problem that comes out of nowhere on Pudzer with the labor secretary, because these nanny issues in the past, these undocumented worker issues have been sometimes fatal, but generally speaking, all these people we're going to get through. And so I really think the Democrats are wasting their time and their political capital. There is so much to criticize Donald Trump on. He threw the whole country under the bus the other day, said we're all a bunch of killers and we're the same as Putin and everything else. There is always something. And they could be working to galvanize their voters. They could be trying to find a leader who is not Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, because if they tie their wings to them, they're going to sink like a stone. And they can be trying to rebuild at the lower level, at the state house level, the governor in the governorships. Instead, they're just trying to stay up all night in the Senate. I think it's a total waste of time.
In the case of Jeff Sessions, the senator who has been nominated as Attorney General, so much of the debate over his nomination has focused on issues relating to race, and particularly his failed nomination some 31 years ago for a federal judgeship that's centered on some of the same issues. Of course, Senator Sessions maintains that he's compiled a solid record on race relations and related issues. But all of this charge of racism that is being directed against the Attorney General nominee doesn't sit very well with Texas Senator Ted Cruz.
The Democrats are the party of the Ku Klux Klan. You look at the most racist, you look at the people, the Dixiecrats. They were Democrats who imposed segregation, imposed Jim Crow laws, who founded the Klan. The Klan was founded by a great many Democrats, and yet now the Democrats just accuse anyone they disagree with of being a racist.
That's strong medicine, Charles. Is it accurate?
It's strong. He's not wrong about it. As a Southerner, that is, they were the worst racists in the South.
Is this a point that Senator Cruz should be making in the context of this confirmation battle?
No. I think the accusations of racism against Jeff Sessions are absurd. But I also think that pointing out the fact that the left does try to shut down every single debate by using that that issue is reprehensible and actually sets us back in terms of race relations. But I think the real problem with the Democrats trying to obstruct every single one of these nominees coming through, and I think they are doing a terrible job, and I don't think they're going to succeed at any of them, or maybe one or two of them, is that it sets up the fight for the confirmation of Neil Gorsuch. And then that one isn't even the whole game. The whole game will be if there is another justice who retires after him, and they have to fight that fight.
And who is not a conservative in the Scalia-Gorsuch mold.
Exactly. And even if it's somebody who is more of a swing vote, not necessarily on the liberal side of the court, that's going to be the titanic fight that they need to be focused on.
One interesting aspect of this kerfuffle involving Senator Warren is that it lured Hillary Clinton out of her secure, undisclosed location to her Twitter feed, and she tweeted in response to what Senator McConnell said as why he acted against Senator Warren as he did. Quoting Senator McConnell, Hillary Clinton tweeted, "She was warned, she was given an explanation, nevertheless she persisted," and then Mrs. Clinton added, "So must we all." Daniel, are we going to see more and more of Hillary Clinton? And are these going to be the types of issues you think where she's going to sort of reemerge?
It kind of felt like she was handing the baton off to Elizabeth Warren. I mean, I think she wants to be relevant. She is joining the speaking circuit. She's got some books coming out. She doesn't want to just disappear forever from our imagination.
Well, she's dead broke, so.
And now she's dead broke, probably. So, look, she'll be around. And I think she will weigh in when she thinks she can be effective. I'm not so sure she can be effective. There aren't too many Democrats looking to her to lead them. They need somebody else.
Thank you, panel. That's it for the panel. That is it for us. Thanks for watching Special Report. I'm James Rosen. Good night from Washington. The first 100 days with Martha McCallum is up next.